There lies a porcelain throne. You're listening to the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm recording the intro the morning after the election. 4 years ago at this time, I recorded my first Powell Movement podcast ever with Jeremy Jones. That morning, the minority of our country was happy, and the majority of us were shocked and bummed out. Jeremy Jones was especially bummed out. All of his hard work on the Protect Our Winners program that he had been putting in, and all the wins that he had had, they were at risk of disappearing. And over the past 4 years, a lot of the regulations in this country have been pulled back in favor of big business. Sucks for the environment, but this is America. But what is different about America this election year is that while most years we would already have a president, this isn't most years. Most years, I'm proud to be an American. But for the past 4 years, this country has been fucking crazier than I ever remember, and I'm embarrassed. We all should be. I mean, you can't even talk politics without having a fight with someone, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else about this. I've never seen this country so divided. We've gone from the greatest country in the world to a place that I don't even recognize. It kind of reminds me of what happened to Vail after I moved out in '99. Good thing this isn't a political podcast, so there's no need to talk politics anymore. It's time to talk about snowboarding. And this week, I have another living legend on the show. I could really say that about every guest I've had on lately, as they all are truly legends for the most part. But Dave Downing is a legendary Burton rider that was a pioneer in the world of splitboarding. On the podcast, Dave and I talk about being a Burton rep, standard films, Mack Dawg, God, Craig Kelly, and a whole lot more. Before I get into it, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. First, subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend who'd like the show to check it out. Second, make sure you have your shit together for winter. If you don't, check out Cole Headwear and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports to get dialed in on your gear, and enjoy placing your order with a Stanley pint glass full of an ice-cold 10-barrel beer. That sounds like living to me. But we're not here to live, we're here to talk. And now it's time to talk to Burton lifer, Dave Downing. I'm pretty good, man. Pretty crazy week in my little world, but everything's working out how it's supposed to be. I had a 92-year-old grandmother who was never sick in her life and died of old age.
Oh, sorry to hear that, bro. Sorry to hear that.
It's all good, man. You know, it's part of the whole cycle, but yeah, the whole family's getting through it, and she was kind of like the glue.
Right. 92, dude. That's pretty good. That's a long one.
She lived a really amazing life, and then it made me think about like skiers and snowboarders that die in the mountains, and you know, we're always like, oh, they died doing what they love and shit like that. But my grandmother, she died doing what she loved, like being around her family at 92 years old, where all the people I know that are gone at like 28, it's just like, what a waste when you see someone at 92. I don't know.
Right.
But we can get into the podcast and not talk about my grandmother. You know, one thing that came up in my research a ton when I was just looking into you was a religious element. Every time I find an interview or a weird old thing, there'd be a comment about reading the Bible in it. And are you a religious guy?
I try not to be religious, but I am a Christian. I believe in Jesus. I believe in the Bible, you know, but I try not to be religious about it. You know what I'm saying?
Like you're no Russell Wilson, like after a run, just praising God and everything's great. It's just that's what you believe.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about it. It's just that, well, a lot of people, when they're like, oh, you're a Christian? I'm like, well, I don't know. It depends on what that means to you, because a lot of people have like a different mentality of what that even is. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's kind of what I mean when I say that. But I definitely have faith and beliefs for sure.
Do you think in the world of snowboarding, if you were to be an outwardly religious athlete, that would be harmful to your career?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I was fairly open about, you know, what I believe in my faith, but it wasn't like, you know, people think it's religion, and it's not really religion. You know, it's a relationship with God, the creator. So,
yep. And you know what? I interviewed Jim Rippey, and he was also into the creator and had a deep faith.
Right.
Was there an old school crew that was all connected to God that you were a part of back then?
No, not at all, dude. Not at all. Not at all. Like, I was probably the only one that I knew of. You know, I remember Jim, you know, him coming to believe in God. He's in Alaska. I know his story. This was in the late 90s, probably. Yep. You know, so that was later on for sure. But yeah, there was nobody else that I really recall back then that was a believer, you know.
Yeah, and did you have a moment that makes you have more faith, or is it something that just starts with your family when you're growing up and you go to church every Sunday and that's what you believe?
Yeah, I mean, I did grow up in a Christian home, but I had to challenge it in myself, and then I went to a camp at Catalina Island when I was probably 14, 15, and that's where somebody like spoke to me in a language that I could understand and like opened the Bible and like I started looking at it and I started reading it and I started to understand like, dude, the gospel, these guys are just fishermen. These dudes, these fishermen, they're uneducated fishermen. They're telling this like I had to dig into it basically, and that's over the late teens, early 20s is really when I became to fully believe.
Yeah. So it's not like you're being totally pushed in.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. You know, it was completely up to me. It wasn't like these rules. And that's why people say it's religion, but it's not. It's not a lot of rules and regulations. It's a relationship. So it has nothing to do with the rules.
Yeah. And growing up in California, from what I read, snowboarding wasn't a focus for you as a kid. And I know surfing doesn't start until you're like 12-ish. So when you're like a young kid, what are the sports that you're into? What do your parents push you into, if anything?
I was kind of like any other kid. I grew up in a boat, fishing a lot. My dad was a fisherman and a diver, so I spent a lot of time in the ocean. I was playing baseball, and then I played soccer a lot. So I played soccer like in elementary school and all through high school. I didn't really start surfing probably till I was like maybe 13 or 14, something like that. So that's when I started surfing, and I really got into surfing. And then over the years, surfing kind of took over as far as a sport. Like I stopped playing soccer in high school at the end of high school, and all I wanted to do was surf. And I wanted to be a pro surfer, and that was my dream to be a pro surfer. And like I looked up to Tom Carroll and all these guys, and I was like obsessed about surfing.
Do you skate as well, or is it just surf?
I did skate a little bit back then. It's funny, like I didn't really skateboard, like learn how to ollie and do tricks and stuff until I was snowboarding because I started snowboarding in Big Bear and doing that, and the skate influence and everything was really heavy. So that's when I started skateboarding more because it helped my snowboarding if I could skate.
I think about just being a skateboarder or a surfer and being from California, where anywhere else in the country, you're kind of looked at as an outcast. But when you're in the center of where all the culture is that kind of the normal thing? Are there a lot of kids that fit that skate and surf mold?
Yeah, I mean, that's how California is. Where I'm from, it's like skating and surfing. Everybody kind of does it. And then snowboarding came along, and then that was like huge, right? In the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, it was like everybody was snowboarding. Oh, snowboarding is this new cool thing. And I got right into it. And you surfed and you skateboarded and you snowboarded in the wintertime.
Yeah, and before you even start snowboarding, you get a job at ET Surf in Hermosa Beach.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting out of high school, and the plans are to work, surf a shit ton, and hopefully become a sponsored surfer. Were you anywhere close to getting free boards or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I was a pro surfer. Like, I made a little bit of money, but I sucked at it, really, honestly. Like, back then, there was a tour called the PSAA. It was a pro tour, and if you won a heat, you'd make $100. That was pretty cool. You'd win a heat, and you make $100, and you keep moving on in the contest. And my whole career, I think I made like $1,200 in my career. I won some heats and stuff, but obviously I wasn't that great at it. I never made money from sponsors or anything like that, but I did get, free wetsuits and clothing and stuff like that. But I definitely wasn't that great at all. But it was just like my dream. Like I said before, it was like this dream. I want to be a pro surfer. And then a few years later, in 1990, I'm 21 years old and I got into snowboarding. And then it's weird how that became my career.
Yeah, I mean, your snowboarding career or your snowboarding in general starts on a ski trip. I think you end up going to Snowbird and you end up breaking your skis. I don't even really care how that happens because it's the best thing that ever happens to you because you're able to go down and rent some gear. You're talked into renting a snowboard. And is it something where your surf experience transitions over to snow pretty easy?
Yeah, totally. Like I thought snowboarding was stupid. The little bit of snowboarding I saw, people weren't really in control. They didn't look that good. And then when I did it, I remember the day I did it, it was at Snowbird in Utah, and I broke my skis, like I said, and then my friend talks me into renting a snowboard, and I go up, and I kept falling off the lift, on the hard pack, and then there's this place at Snowbird, the Little Cloud Bowl, and like I remember sitting on the cat track and my feet in the powder, and it just snowed like 6 inches, and I was scared. I'm like, oh my God, I'm just going to tumble down this thing. But once I started going down in the powder, I felt that flotation. It felt like surfing, and I could just turn like a surfboard. And I rode the whole bowl down. I was so stoked. I was like, oh my gosh. I just couldn't believe it, but then I got back on the hard pack and I kept falling over again. So it was really cool to feel that experience of surfing on the snow.
And while you don't know it at the time, it's like your life at that point, it might not be as promising as maybe what your parents want it to be at that point, but that's all about to change. Because before you know it, you're going to have a real job. Then that real job is going to transition into a pro career. Then that's going to transition back to some kind of real job. But when you first go on that trip at Snowbird, do you go home and get some beer and start riding, or get some gear and start riding a few days a week? Like, was it an addiction from the get-go?
It was an addiction from the very beginning, for sure. So a little backstory too. I was going to college to be a fireman. So that was my career path, right?
Huh.
I wanted to be a pro surfer, but that really wasn't working out. So I'm going to college.
You need a college degree to be a fireman?
You do, and I was applying for a job in the fire service out here in California, but it was really hard at that time to get in. But anyways, I'm trying to be a fireman, and all of a sudden I start snowboarding. I'm just like obsessed with it for like that winter. And then I remember I got a job working for the Burton rep in Southern California, Eric Stoops and Janie Smith, who were the Burton reps in Southern California at that time. So I'm a Burton rep, so I'm starting to make money that way, and I'm working at the snowboard shop, and I'm going to college for a few years. And then, like I think it was 93, I think, or 4, but the team manager at the time, Eric Koch, who I knew, he invited me to go on this trip to Italy because Cersei Walls blew her knee out or something, couldn't go. And so he's trying to fill this spot, this Transworld snowboarding magazine trip to Italy. So he calls me up. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'll go for sure. Are you kidding me? I've never been out of the States. So I had to get a passport and the whole deal. And I go on this trip to Italy, and it radically changed my life. I met Jeff Curtis on that trip. I met Shannon Dunn, who's now my wife, on that trip. I mean, it was just amazing. Tina Bassich was on that trip too. It's an awesome friend of mine a year later, I moved to Utah and lived at Tina's house, rented a bedroom from her. And so that was a radical change in my life, that trip to Italy. And I came back from that trip, and that was the beginning of me being a quote unquote pro snowboarder.
Even before that trip, because you're riding at Big Bear a lot, and that's like where the progression of park riding is. I mean, snowboard parks are pretty much founded there. All the cool features are there. I don't think any skiers are allowed in there. So it's truly unique to what snowboarding is, and you're in the hub of the world. Is every pro making the pilgrimage out to Big Bear, and are you just riding with some of the more progressive people out there in the sport?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're 100% right. So 90 to 94, right in there, that's right when it all happened. And, Mike Perillo was working at Bear Mountain, and he developed that whole snowboard park. So there was a run, it's called the Outlaw Park. And it was like, we were outlaws, right? The skiers didn't want to have nothing to do with us. They were like, stay over there. You guys just stay over there. So we had this run to ourselves over there, and Mike Perillo and a few people would just build these little jumps and banks and all this stuff. It's like a skate park. And that was the first real snowboard park of its kind that Bear Mountain really started. And then, at that same time, like Brian Zine, Rob Defoe, Todd Messick are just some names that were there. And then all of a sudden, Jeff Brushy came out. Brian Iguchi was really prominent up there. And so there was this whole scene in Southern California at Bear Mountain where freestyle snowboarding was really becoming really popular. I mean, in the 80s, like Terry Kidwell and guys up in Tahoe, Palmer, and those guys were doing stuff. But this was Southern California, very surf skate culture, and it just was going off up there.
When you're the Burton rep and you're up at Big Bear all the time, I would think it's one of those things where everybody knows you, and all the riders that are coming in town, they're going to find you, in case they need boards, they need this, they need that. And is that around the time that you meet Craig Kelly? Because he becomes more than just a dude that comes into town in your life. I believe he becomes a major influence to so many people. And is that when you meet him?
I actually met him at a sales meeting. he he didn't want to have anything to do with Big Bear at the time, because at that time Craig was kind of over the pipe scene. He was kind of getting out of that.
Okay.
He was going to the backcountry, right? So, in the early 90s, I'm just engulfed in this freestyle thing, and he's learning about the backcountry. And then by about 94, I think it was 94, is when, I met Craig, and he was just such a huge inspiration to me, and then he became my friend. And he really poured into my life of like what snowboarding is and the whole thing. So I wanted to move to Utah. So in 94, I moved to Utah, and because I wanted to learn about the mountains, I wanted to learn about snowboarding in natural terrain and learn about the backcountry and, do all the things that my hero, Craig Kelly, was doing, basically.
And you don't just move there first. Like you said, you went and visited Shannon Dunn in Utah, and she had asked Hatchet if you could come along on a photo shoot, and he's like, no, but he can go shoot with Peter and Mack Dawg.
No, Mike Hatchet. So Mike Hatchet and Mike McIntyre were at Standard Film. So basically, I flew out to Utah, and Mike McIntyre, Mack Dawg, Shannon was going out with him to go film, and she's like, can Dave come along? He's like, no, dude, you can't go. And then Mack Dawg was like, well, he can go with Kurt Heine. Him and his kid Peter are going to go build a jump. He can go out with them and see what happens. So I went out with Peter Line and Kurt Heine for a couple days, and we just started building jumps and going off them, and we were having so much fun. And then Kurt's like, dude, Dogger, you got to go out with these guys, Dave and Peter. So we switched groups, and then the next day I went with Mack Dawg and Peter to build some other jumps, and I connected with Mack Dawg really quickly because he was cool, and I was kind of older at that time. I was like 23 or 4 or something.
Peter's like 15.
I don't really remember. Peter just didn't talk much back then. He was so funny. He's like this kid, and he was doing all those corkscrews and stuff, and we didn't know what they were. We're like, what the heck was that? Like, did he just fall? But he didn't. He was laying on his feet, But like when he went off the lip, it looked like he was falling, but he was purposely doing like a corkscrew at 720 or something.
Yep.
So that was like a groundbreaking time of tricks. That was like 94-ish or whatever. But anyways, long story short is I get connected with Mack Dawg, and he's like, dude, you got to go out to Tahoe to meet Mike Hatchet. So 3 days later, I fly to Tahoe, and I meet Mike Hatchet, and I remember the day we were at Squaw Valley. The Palisades were just closed because it was in the spring. This is in like April or something. And I go to Squaw Valley, meet Mike Hatchet, and he's just like super intense guy. I'm like, whoa, dude, this guy's gnarly. And Tex Davenport was there. And Tex Davenport's like hiking these gnarly lines and doing these shoots, and he's just like the man of all men, he's like gnarly.
Yeah.
And I was totally petrified. I'm like, what did I get myself into? These guys are jumping off cliffs, and like it's super intense. And I didn't know what to do. And then I ended up doing a couple lines that day, and then Mike and I got all stoked. It just worked out. Next thing you know, I'm going out with Mike Hatchet in the backcountry and learning from, Mike Hatchet, Dave Hatchet, Tex Davenport, Tom Burt, like all these legend, Noah Slasnick. So, I mean, I just learned so much from being in that environment.
When you just named all those names and you get thrown into shooting with them, these are all established dudes that are your heroes, I would think, or at least some of them are. And then they put you into a situation where you're filming with them. You have to land in powder, which you don't probably have a ton of experience with yet. And I'm sure there's a transition just figuring that part out as well. And is there extra pressure on you just being around that crew, or do you not care?
Oh, totally. So that was TV3, and I was tripping out. I had no clue what I was doing. I was just like immersed in this culture, right, with Mike Hatchet. And it was very intense because he's an intense, awesome guy, but he's really serious, and he's very calculated. He's like, okay, go up there, and you're going to do this, and I'm going to film from here. And it's just like super intense, but he's like on it. And I learned so much from that and being in that environment. And then, like I said, learning from Tom Burt, like when Tom Burt looks at a line and say, yeah, that's going to go, or learn from Dave Hatchet saying like, oh, dude, if you go down this and you go by that tree and your left comes over here, you're going to get swept over here. So go over here and do this. So I'm learning as I'm going. I'm just this surfer kid from Southern California, from Big Bear. Just my eyes are like wide open, and I'm learning so much every single day. That's how it started in that first movie, TB3. And then, the next year, that's when I moved to Utah and started really going on the backcountry by myself. And that first year, TB4 was like Dave Lee and myself and Mike Hatchett, and we were just hiking behind Brighton and just wandering around looking for stuff to jump off of and do stuff off of. You know, it was just really cool back then because it wasn't calculated. You know, like filming back then was very it was very innocent where like we would just do stuff. Oh, let's jump off of here. Cool. And we'd film it and it would like be sick. And then, you know, I remember like it was probably close to 2000, 99, 2000. So Mack Dawg, his freestyle stuff, like I remember when Mack Dawg's like, oh, dude, that jump's not big enough. Like, don't even bother. And I'm like, what? Like, that's when the level got so high and it almost like became not even fun anymore. It was just so gnarly because Mack Dawg is trying to push the sport so much, you know, and JP Walker's on the scene and Jeremy Jones, and they're pushing the level so high it almost got not fun for me personally. Like I like pushing myself, but they were pushing it so hard at the time, you know, like going on a rail trip with JP Walker is like frightening.
Now it's time for me to take a sponsor break, and my first sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing the Northwest's best beer and supporting all things ski, snowboard, and bike since 2006. When I say their beer is the best, I really mean that. Recently, I've been drinking Nature Calls Mountain IPA, and not only does it have the best name in beer, a portion of the proceeds benefits the Conservation Alliance, so it does make a difference. And as far as supporting action sports, no other beer comes close to what 10 Barrel does for ski, snowboard, and bike. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and support the beer that supports the sports we love, the 10 Barrel Brewery. My next sponsor is Stanley. You know, the brand that has been around for over 100 years, the ones that invented that keep things hot and keep things cold category. Back in the day, you could count on your grandpa's green Stanley to keep the hot chocolate, soups, and so much more hot. Well, these days, Stanley still makes that same green bottle, and they also make so many more products that will keep your liquids hotter and colder for a couple hours longer than any other product on the market. You know I think you deserve the best for less, and I'm going to make that happen again at Stanley. To save 30% on all Stanley products, head on over to stanley-pmi.com, go shopping, head to checkout, enter the code drinkfast, that's all one word, all lowercase, and you're good to go. You'll save 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. I mean, it seems like when you started doing this, you guys were explorers. You were heading out there. Everything was adventure, and it was so cool. And then, like you say, by 2000, the level of gnarly has to increase every year. And the beauty of your career is that you never really had to be gnarly because it was all about style. You didn't have to ride the craziest line that was for Johan or someone else. You were going to make something look really, really good. And that worked for like 15 years for you. And then eventually the bar raises to a point where you don't even want to do it anymore.
Well, snowboarding just was never that way for me. You know, I think that had a lot to do with Craig. Like Craig Kelly really influenced me a lot. Snowboarding was never gnarly for Craig. Like he was just like going to make it look good. It was awesome, right? It wasn't ever about being gnarly. And so like I kind of saw that, and Craig never did the gnarliest thing. He would do the most eye-pleasing thing.
Yep.
Or like we went to a big bowl and there's like these cliffs and all this stuff. He would pick out the most eye-pleasing, perfect, sick line, and he would rip it top to bottom. You know, he wouldn't go over and jump off the 80-footer to flat just to be the man. He would never do that. So I learned a lot from that, you know, and that's what snowboarding was to me. You know, it wasn't about doing the gnarliest trick. It was never about that. It was about adapting to the terrain and riding the best you can and being in control no matter what gear you're in. You know, I think when you're snowboarding, you should be in the right gear for what terrain you're in. You should never be out of control. You should be in the right gear, you know? So that's how I've always seen it. Whether you're hitting a jump, hitting a handrail, riding a half pipe, you know, riding a big mountain line, whatever you're doing, I think it should be done that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for style. There's so many people that can do a lot of tricks and make them look terrible when all someone wants to see is an easy trick that looks good, at least in my opinion.
Well, those are the tricks that feel good, you know, like a frontside 360, that feels the best. That's the best trick I've ever done. It feels the best. You're totally blind, you know, especially a big one. If you can do a big frontside 360 off a natural thing in the backcountry, it's the best feeling in the world. You're just flying through the air, grabbing your board and just like breathing through the air, and you come around, you spot your landing, and you just put it down in the PAL. It's like there's no other feeling like that.
Yeah. Well, I would say a feeling for you that is probably one of the greatest feelings in the world is going from a rep to being an actual pro rider, because your job at one point is going shop to shop, clinic to clinic, learning product, knowing everything about it, then selling it in. And you get that phone call, which you said is the dream of the lifetime. And you go to Italy, you get some shots published. You also start filming for TB3. You actually open that movie up, which is unheard of for a rookie dude in a movie. And how does official sponsorship happen with Burton when they're like, okay, I guess you're not going to be a rep anymore. We're going to pay you to just ride.
Yeah, I mean that is how it happened. You just said it. But that helped me, I think, in my professional career as a snowboarder because I had this like retailer background. Like I knew people actually went and bought things at stores. I knew how that worked. I knew there was customers, right? I knew that shops had to buy things and then customers come in and actually buy the stuff. So I understood that. So when I really got involved with Burton as a pro rider, and Jake was, I mean, I could talk about Jake for a couple hours, but he listened to me. He would look in my eyes and he would listen to me. He actually wanted to know what I had to say. And that's where the Burton Custom came from, was me having a little bit of knowledge in retail and being a pro snowboarder saying, hey, let's develop this board that's this blue collar pro level board, but that doesn't have a name on it. It doesn't have anybody's name on it. Because back then there was a lot of pro models. A lot of people had pro model, their name on it. And I'd never wanted to have my name on anything. But I wanted to help design and develop it. So that's where the custom came along.
Do you get a royalty for the custom?
No, I never wanted to. I just thought that was not cool. I just didn't like the whole pro model thing. Like Terry Hawkinson, he deserves a pro model.
Sure.
Craig Kelly, pro model. Like there's a few people in the world that's like, do they need a pro model? But for me, I just wanted a good board. The whole Burton Custom, I developed that for 10 years. And did the whole graphic thing with them and worked with a lot of great people at Burton to do that. Bindings and boots and outerwear. The whole AK collection from Burton, that whole thing came with Craig and I and talking about that. So that whole retail thing and being a rep really helped me through my pro snowboarding career, I think.
So you have to make the phone call to your rep and you're like, thank you for giving me a dream job at 21, but I'm out. Mm-hmm. I'm stepping up to the big leagues. Is that what had to happen?
Basically, yeah. Eric and Janie, I called them. I'm like, hey, I have this opportunity to like ride for Burton. They're like, no way, this is awesome. Like they were totally stoked, like they wanted nothing but the best for me. So I was really grateful for that.
And there's no thought though in your head of becoming a pro rider at that point, right? When you get to be the Burton rep, are you just stoked? Like, I'm going to be a lifer in this industry and I'm going to be running the Burton program at one point?
No, I had no idea. I had no concept. I just loved the sport. So I was like, oh, I can be the Burton. I'm working in the industry, and then I went on this trip and next thing you know, I'm being asked to like ride for Burton and stuff. It was really weird because I had no concept of like being a pro snowboarder because back then a pro snowboarder was just, I don't even know what that was. This is way before the internet. This is like there was VHS copies of movies and things, but it was a different time, and the sport was just blowing up.
And your role in the sport is always going to be photo and video. Like you're not worried about contests. There are no athlete projects at that point.
I did contests, and the contests were important. I mean, this is, after Craig Kelly fully dominated the whole pipe scene, right? There was no slope style contests at that time. It was just half pipe contests.
Okay.
And I went to the U.S. Open a lot. I made the finals of the U.S. Open, but that wasn't my full thing. My wife, Shannon Dunn, was the full competitor, and she went and dominated all kinds of half-pipe contests, But my focus was going out and filming and going on photo shoots, and really it was just trying to make snowboarding look good. That's kind of what my job was.
And when you get sponsored by Burton and your job is to make things look cool, are there other brands that want to come on because you're associated with Burton? Like, who are the brands in your heyday that are paying the bills?
Yeah, sure. So, like, I was sponsored by Oakley. I rode for Oakley, and Reef Shoes had a full snowboarding team back then. Nixon, I helped start Nixon and got that in. So I had other sponsors for sure. But, Burton has always been my head-to-toe sponsor,
And you're able to make, I would think, a pretty good salary, like from the get-go in snowboarding where you don't have to work another job ever?
You couldn't. I mean, you're just, for 8 months out of the year at least, all I did was snowboard and go places and go pioneer places. And so it's not like you could have another job, Like it was a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. I loved it, but it was a lot of work. There was a lot of stress trying to come up with a video part, a 3-minute video part every year. It takes 5-6 months to get that 3-minute video part.
And then if you don't have clips early on in the season, I would think that pressure just stacks on your shoulders like, I've only got
Totally.
2 more months.
Totally. I mean, people don't see it. You know, they would always look at the video and be like, oh, that's a cool video part. And they didn't see the months and months and months of just failure after failure after failure, and going to build a jump and then hitting it 5 times and not getting your trick and getting injured, or getting stuck in the backcountry, or going on trips and having the weather be bad for a week and a half and not getting any clips. Or there's a lot to it that nobody ever saw, right? They just see the 3 minutes and they're like, oh, that was amazing. But they never saw the realness of it. But that's the part I liked, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of the magic of it. You just want to see the amazing stuff. The internet's kind of ruined that because you get to see everything now because so many people put so much different stuff up there. Although it's always great to see someone not get a trick for a bunch of times and then nail their trick and see just the joy of getting it. But going back to paying the bills, it's interesting because you're married to Shannon Dunn. I think she's Shannon Dunn Downing now.
Yep.
You know, in looking at snowboarding and equality, it's easy to say that men make more than women, but I don't see contracts on both sides. But you and your wife are pro snowboarders at the same time, definitely different style snowboarders. She is dominating contests and you are dominating just video parts, and there's no dominating in it. You're putting out video parts every year and, you know, working behind the scenes. But do you ever compare salaries and realize that, hey, I'm making a lot more because I'm a guy, or does that ever come into play?
You're definitely have to interview her on this whole thing, but from my perspective, Shannon really she took women's snowboarding to a whole new level. She was the first woman to have a sold pro model. You know, she developed women's specific clothing, colorways, a whole women's line, women's goggles. All that came from Shannon, and Tina Bassage too. But Shannon was a pioneer in what women's snowboarding is today. And salaries and all that. She was really adamant about equal prize money, you know, and that whole thing. She was really, really a pioneer in all that. So you have to ask her all those questions. But from my perspective, she really put women's snowboarding on the map. And we never compared, you know, this and that, but she definitely put it on the map.
I totally agree. I think it would just be interesting to find out, did you make more? Because if you did, it would be crazy because she did so much more, I would say.
No, she made more than I did as a pro snowboarder, pro rider, for sure. But nowadays, I mean, there's women that make a great living. Professional snowboarding, professional surfers, women make a lot of money. There's a lot there. So I think it's great.
Okay. Back to riding. You move to Utah, you start riding every day, like you say, and you're hiking. And we've already talked about you developing boards with Burton. But in the development process of a snowboard, how much time are you actually putting in? Are you flying back to Vermont and going and actually laying up boards, taking 10 samples and riding them and picking out the best ones? Are you using different woods? What's your involvement?
I mean, I had a great relationship with a guy named JG at Burton. He's probably been there for 35, 40 years. It seems like 100 years. I call him Yoda, and he's taught me everything about snowboards, how they work, how they're made, everything about them. And he's phenomenal. So I had a great relationship with him and a lot of other product people at Burton. So it was a lot of phone calls back then. There was no text messages back then. Internet was barely in existence, you know. So
you're faxing drawings?
Literally faxing. I was with Craig. I remember Craig Kelly faxing feedback back to Burton. On a fax machine, dude. I was like, whoa. But most of my things were over the phone, or I'd get together with JG. The Burton Custom, you know, we flew to New Zealand with 2 board bags full of 14 boards, and they were all prototypes, and we came back with the one. So it was a lot of that, make a bunch of boards, make a bunch of mistakes, go out and ride them, go back to the drawing board, JG would make more boards, ride them again, blah, 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 right? So JG would always send me black boards. He would never tell me what they are. He would have little numbers on there or whatever. He would never tell me what they are. He would just be like, go ride these 4 boards. Tell me what you think. And so I would go ride them, and I'd come back and be like, hey, JG, this number 2659, I hate it, blah, blah, blah. This one I like. This was the reason why I like it. And he'd be like, oh, yeah, you like that one better because it has less side cut. It's more stable, blah, blah, blah. So he would teach me that way, you know, instead of telling me what's in this board before I went and wrote it. because
Yeah.
then I'm like, have this perception of what I think it is, So he would trick me that way a lot. But, I had a great relationship with all the product managers at Burton because Jake was like, dude, listen to the riders. I mean, he was like on those guys, like, dude, just listen to them, listen to them, listen to them, listen to them, listen to them. Do it. Spend the money. Do it. Make that prototype. Go for it. Do it. And there was a lot of mistakes. I mean, dude, we made a lot of mistakes and wasted a lot of money trying to do some binding or board or boot that it just didn't work, but that's kind of what you got to do, right?
Yeah, if you're going to progress the sport. And speaking of progressing the sport, Jake's involved in a lot of things. How involved, like in your career? I mean, is he coming to the meetings and actually involved in day to day? I'm sure after 2010, probably not as much.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dude, he was psycho. He was like a product geek on steroid. He was like, I mean, dude, he would have hundreds of jackets in his office at his house, and in every jacket would have like a note card inside there with a pin. So his assistant would go through all his jackets, put a note card in there with a little pin, and he'd be up riding, and he'd take out his, like, on the chairlift, and I'd take out and like write little notes in this note card and put it back in his pocket, and his assistant would have to take those and give it to the product manager. Like, Jake hates this cuff, the Velcro's too long or whatever. Like, product managers hated it when Jake would walk in their office. He'd be like, this sucks. What are you thinking? Yeah, I told you to do it this way and you did it this way or whatever. Like, he was super, super into it. And we would have these crazy roundtable meetings in Long Island at his house in Long Island where, there's 8 team riders in this room with Jake for 3 days with product managers. And we'd go through everything. Like from 8 in the morning till 7 at night. It was just like go through every single product, every zipper, every Velcro thing, the backpacks, the boots, the bindings, the colors, the everything. It was pretty intense. It wasn't just like, here's some stuff, go ride it. My whole career with Jake was centered around the product and making the stuff better. And he was pretty obsessed about it because he wanted it for himself too. Like, he wanted to snowboard till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He didn't want to have to go in because his feet hurt or he was cold because his jacket didn't work. You know what I mean? He'd be pissed. So he wanted the stuff to work. So he was adamant about all the product, which was really cool, to sit down with the owner of the company and to like go back and forth and hash it out. And we'd argue all the time, like, why do you need that, Jake? You don't need that. Yes, I do. It needs to be this way. And we would like fully argue all the time. And those are some of my fondest memories of Jake, is those arguments that were good.
And was your relationship with him strictly like work and snowboarding, or was there a personal friendship there? I mean, obviously there's a friendship that develops over time, but is it something where you're hanging out outside of work stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that revolved all around surfing because he loved surfing, and I love surfing. And so he would steal me out of meetings and go on a surf trip. I have crazy stories of him just pulling me out of important things and then going surfing because the waves are good. So those were really, really special times, like he loved surfing. He took me on some awesome surf trips, and he was so generous. Some people ask me now, it's just like, oh, what was Jake like? I'm like, dude, he was generous. That's the first word that comes to my brain because he would just do anything for you, or he would lend you something, give it, oh yeah, you need this, here you go, or, oh, dude, come on this trip where it's going to be so awesome. And he just wanted to have fun with people. And he was just so generous. Yeah, that's the word that comes to mind.
And in terms of the generosity, it goes into getting your career on fire in terms of travel. And I would think back then, between helicopters and snowcats, you could have whatever you wanted if you were on that level. But you kind of went a different direction. You found yourself in the backcountry in like 95, and that's when you start splitboarding. But before Jeremy Jones was going deeper, further, longer, and harder, you were doing it. And what was the first time you were aware that splitboarding was even a thing?
Let me think. It was probably 95-ish or something like that. So Brad Chaffel, who used to ride for Burton, and he used to work at Salty Peaks in Utah. I was living in Utah, and I went in there to get my board tuned by Brad. And there was a splitboard in the corner, and we were like laughing about it. Because I was hiking behind Brighton at the time, and I'd see these, zigzag things going up the mountain. I'm like, what is that? I didn't even know what it was. And I'm snowshoeing and hiking around the backcountry, and I saw this splitboard, and he's like, oh, yeah, that's a demo. You should try it. I'm like, well, this thing's crazy. And I picked it up. It's super heavy. I'm like, whoa. And I took it, and I went out to behind Brighton, and I was tripping out on like, I could go up on the same thing I'm coming down on. I didn't have to carry my board. And I took like 6 runs or something like that. Normally I take like one or two. I was just kind of like, this is insane. And I'm like, I can make this thing so much better, but these things totally work. And that's where I got into splitboarding. And then I started talking to JG a lot and begging him basically, dude, we got to make the splitboard. And he's just like, what are you talking about? And then we started making some split boards, and they just had the normal Burton graphic on the bottom. They're prototypes, and then we started making them more and more. I started filming on them. I started getting some clips in movies, and nobody knew because it looked like a Burton custom. But I had some shots in like TV 6, 7, and 8 probably had split board shots in there that nobody really knew. And then I started begging Burton to like, let's make one. Let's develop it and let's sell it. Because they work, and nobody really believed that they really work. So at that point, I'm like, let's make one. And I had this idea. I'm like, I'm going to film a whole video part on this thing. Because I got to prove that these things actually work.
Right.
And so that was TB9. My whole video part was on a splitboard. And I risked my career to do this, but I believe that they worked.
Are you really risking your career, though, when you have someone like Jake who has your back, and you're like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm doing something that's totally different. I think it's going to work, and we can create a new product category based off of it, but I just have to do this part to prove it. So I would think that, like, it's not as big of a risk.
Yeah, but if you're not producing, if you're not getting stuff in magazines and getting a video part, you're just going to go away.
Right.
That's just the way it is. Team manager's going to be like, dude, this guy's not pulling it. He had 6 months to film a video part, and he wasted his time writing a splitboard. So it was a risk. And I felt it. People were like laughing at me. My friends were like, Jeremy Jones from Utah is like laughing at me, And I'm like, dude, I'm going to bet you, $200, I'm going to film a split part. And he's like, no way. And Kevin Jones was laughing at me. And, people laughed at me. And that was cool because I believed in him. I used to build jumps for Kevin Jones and Marcus Egge with my splitboard. Like I used to like put my skins on and like walk up the jump and make it perfect. And they're like, that thing's sick.
And that's what they thought was cool about the splitboard.
That thing's sick. And they're hitting a jump, and I'd hit the jump with them on my splitboard. But then the next day I'm like out skinning to ride on a line or whatever, So I just did it to prove a point, And obviously there's been a great movement in splitboarding since then. You mentioned Jeremy Jones, like awesome. Like I'm so glad that he took it to a whole new level and, went and camped for 25 days and did his whole deal. And those movies are awesome. And the way he promoted splitboarding, it's great what he's done, And I still splitboard a lot. I just like snowboarding. I like riding powder. So whether I'm snowmobiling or splitboarding or helicopters, which I don't get to do much anymore, or catboarding or whatever, I'll take it however I can get it. You know what I mean? So I just like riding powder. And a splitboard is an awesome way to do it.
Now it's time to jump into my final set of sponsors, and winter is almost here. And you know what everyone needs? A beanie. Everyone needs one, even if you don't ski or snowboard, and warmth is super important. But you know what is just as important as warmth? Style. You don't want to look like an idiot out there when you don't have to. And Cole Headwear is going to make sure you don't look like an idiot because they have the best fits and styles out there. That's why 9 out of 10 beanie wearers that I talked to said that Cole is the best. And now you can experience the style and warmth of Cole without paying full pop. I'm going to save you 15%. And all you need to do is head on over to coleheadwear.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code POWEL15 to save 15% off your entire order. Last but not least is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. For over 60 years, they have been getting people on the snow, and they are psyched for the full launch of the Burton Step-On binding, which will go on sale at Peter Glenn Thursday, November 15th. Like we saw last year and in August, this binding will sell out as Burton has perfected the step-in with a product that works on any board and creates an instant connection and release. This year, there are new colors and the all-new Step-On X, which feature the responsiveness of carbon blend high backs. Again, Burton delivers where the others haven't been able to, and you can get your pair over at peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. I think the coolest part of your splitboarding career, per se, is that while Craig Kelly had a huge influence on you, you had a huge influence on him, and that's with splitboarding, because if you hadn't brought him a splitboard, who knows if he would ever have gotten into it like he did.
I bet he would have. I know he would have. He was a little hesitant But I remember I brought him that Splitboard, and it was in Washington, North Cascade. He was totally into it, but I know he would like his John Buffrey. Buff is a friend of his up in Canada, was already doing it, so Craig would have gotten into it for sure. I mean, how could he not have? You know,
Right.
so he loved it, dude. He just loved it. He's like, this is so rad. Like he just loved it. You know.
Yeah. Something that we're going to see this year is we're going to see a shit ton of split boards being sold. We're going to see a ton of people heading out in the backcountry, and it's going to create situations that we might not have ever seen before. You know, maybe a lot more people than we've ever seen without as much education as, you know, people have had. And that's maybe a stretch. Who knows if I'm correct about this. But do you foresee any problems coming up this year with the amount of people that we're going to see in the backcountry?
I don't know. I had a 15-year career of like knowing where to find places, and I have a lot of places that nobody knows about. So there's a lot of backcountry out there, but you're probably right. You probably will see more of the well-known places a little bit more crowded, but that's okay. I mean, like Utah is crowded, but it's awesome. I mean, there's still tons of fresh. That's great when somebody else is there making a skin track for you, and you just follow the skin track up and then take your own line. That's killer, you know? So I don't think it's going to be crowded in a negative sense from that perspective. I do hope people do educate themselves a little bit when they go out in the backcountry. Take it slow. You don't have to go rush into some big face. You know, you could just ride some mellow tree run and do it with your friends and be educated. So I hope that happens.
Yeah. Getting back into your career, another thing that separated you from a lot of others is you're the dude that can ride everything. Like you can have a great day with either Jeremy Jones. But when you go from like a standard trip to a rail trip with Mack Dawg, do you have to flip a switch in your head and just have a totally different mentality to be able to do that?
Totally, dude. I mean, I remember it. You know, that's what it was. It was almost like you had to flip your hat backwards to just be like, okay, I'm going on a rail trip. Packing my boards, I'm packing my 148 jib board dominant. I'm putting different clothing in this bag, and I'm going on a trip with Mack Dawg to go film handrails.
Yeah.
It's a total different mentality, you know? And I just came from like being up in BC, Canada with Mike Hatchett riding POW and stuff. So it was really cool, but it was stressful. But that's what made it really fun for me, I think, because, you know, every couple of weeks I was kind of changing what I was doing. I wasn't doing the same thing over and over and over, especially in the 90s. You know, I was changing. I would go to half pipe contests, and then like the next week I'm going on a rail trip, and then the next week I'm going filming in the backcountry. And that's what kept it really exciting for me.
It's exciting, but I would think in certain situations, being it a urban feature or just a crazy line, there is fear, and that exists within almost everybody. And which trips could be scarier? Would it be the rail trips or just the backcountry trips?
Rail trips, hands down rail trips. Like I was scared around rail trips. Like seriously, it's scary, man. You're gonna get hurt. You're just gonna get hurt. And the level was being pushed, and it was just the backcountry was to me very calming. And I don't know, it was like there's nobody else around. It was just you were there with, you know, your small group of people, four or five people at the max. You could calculate things and talk about it and then go do it. And I did get hurt in the backcountry. I've been hurt. I've hobbled out of the backcountry for 3 hours with a blown out knee. You
Oh,
know,
man.
I've done that. But every time I hit a handrail in the city, it was scary. Way more scary than hitting a cliff to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would think you just have the control and experience hitting a cliff and everything's unpredictable in the streets.
I mean, dude, tumbling down cheese grater stairs like some ski resort handrail, like I've done that. It sucks. It hurts.
And you did it to, I won't say old age, but you were like one of the older dudes out there doing it, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know what year. I don't know. I was probably definitely into my 40s. My peak of my career was probably 35, maybe. And then I was doing it into my 40s, but I had great friends that were the best of what they do, right? Jeremy Jones, JP Walker, Brian Thien, Kevin Jones. Those are my friends, and I really respect them a lot. So they helped me a lot because I was just a surfer kid. I wasn't like a skater, you know, and they helped me a lot just from being around them.
So for your life, 15 years is all about making a different video part every year and getting photos. And back
Yep.
then, snowboard media was huge. It was dominated by print and video. And now Trans World is gone, Snowboarder is going.
Yep.
Does this create any concerns around the sport and what's happening with snowboarding?
That's a really good question, and it's really hard to answer. But I mean, the pro snowboarding thing is really weird right now. because what's the platform, right? Because when I was a pro snowboarder, the platform was make these VHS tapes and get in these magazines, and people are going to watch them, and it's going to be burned into their soul, and they're going to be stoked on the sport, And now it's Instagram and all these other things, which is cool, but it's very quick. But what I see the sport really doing well, and it is doing really well, is people love to do it. Every time I go to a ski resort, I look around, I'm like, dude, people are just stoked.
Yeah.
They're taking 5 runs and they're going to get a hamburger and a beer and they're psyched. Like they're just totally stoked. That is awesome. As long as people are stoked on getting in a snowboard and going down the hill or skis or whatever that is and having fun, I think it's awesome. Like I said, it's not all about being gnarly, and it's self-expression, and a lot of people can express themselves in different ways as a snowboarder.
It's just now they can't really do it in print, or they can do it with video projects. But it's just a sad time.
It sucks, dude. It sucks. It just sucks. I'm doing actually a sales meeting for Burton right now, and the theme is like the 90s, and I've dug up all these old magazines, and I'm like, dude, this is so sick. There's sick photos in these magazines, like old trans worlds from the 90s and stuff. And I mean, there's some really epic images in these magazines, and it's not going to exist anymore. It's just a bummer.
No, I would think for the photographers out there, it really limits it. Unless you're a staff photographer for a brand, there's really not a market for being a full-on snowboard photographer and making all your money.
It's so hard. It's so hard for those guys, man. I have really good friends that were really good photographers in the 90s, and then, they into the 2000s, and then they're out of it because it's like, hey, there's no money here. I can't even live. And they're the best at what they do. Jeff Curtis. I mean, I could talk for 5 hours about that guy. Like, he was the best at what he did. And in the beginning, he's shooting film, like loading the film in the camera, like going to the dark room and developing it. And like, that was an art form. And he's like traveling in the backcountry, shooting all these things. And he's got just tons of film images, slide films. And then it developed into digital stuff. And then all this social media happened. And it's just kind of like, he can't do that anymore. So it's just a bummer. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I got to live in that time frame. It's just different now. Yeah. It's just different. But kids are going to flourish. They're going to take Instagram or whatever platform comes out in the future or whatever and make projects and promote snowboarding in an awesome way. I mean, I'll use one name, Blake Paul. Yeah. The kid is awesome. He rips, dude, and he's doing it the right way. He's totally promoting the sport, really cool. He has tons of good content.
And you look at a guy like that, he came up with like a Gucci, and people, you came with like the right people to give him a foundation to be as badass as he's become.
I feel great having the sport in those type of hands, is what I'm saying. And he's going to promote the sport. It's going to be good. And there is that whole competition element, the Olympics, which gets a lot of attention, which is great too. And that just gets to be more athletic and gymnastics type of stuff. But man, the stuff that is going on in the slopestyle course or the half pipe is pretty nuts. Mark McMorris is a nutcase.
Yeah, and he can take his tricks anywhere, man. He is insane.
That guy is a nut. I follow cam him at the Dew Tour 3 years ago, and it was 8 a.m. It was flat light, hard as a rock, and he's flying through this course doing switch backside 1080s. And I was scared just riding through follow camming him. Yeah. The stuff he was doing, it just blew me away.
Yeah. Like print coming to an end, everyone's snowboard career has to come to an end at some point, at least the paid pro part. And how do things wind down with you and Burton?
I mean, it kind of wound down sort of naturally. I got to an age, obviously I was getting old and I had a family. I'm like, hey, Jake, at the time, I'm like, dude, I have a lot more to offer this sport or this company than just jumping off a cliff, okay? So that's where it started, in business development and some other things with Burton at that time, working with sales and marketing behind the scenes and other brand, Analog and other brands that he owned back then. So I really got in behind the scenes, and I'm very fortunate that he allowed me to do that. But I had an education in sales back from the 90s, so it's the same thing now. It's just a little different.
Now you just have your resume as legendary pro athlete as well as the sales rep thing that you did, which is pretty cool. Do you have a title at all?
No title. No. I have a hard time with titles. Like I look at like, not Instagram, but what is it? LinkedIn. You go on LinkedIn, you look at people's titles and you're like, what does that mean? Like, I don't even know what that means. Like, my title is my driver's license. Like, that's my name. That's my title. I don't like titles. It just kind of bugs me, because then you're just, I don't know. It's just weird. It's like smoke and mirrors.
It paints you into a box, kind of?
Yeah, it just puts you in a box, and it's like, I don't want to be put in a box, especially in snowboarding, Like, I didn't want to be called a jibber in snowboarding. I didn't want to be called a free rider. I wanted to be a snowboarder. That's what I was.
Yeah. Well, at this point in the show, we're at a segment that I like to call inappropriate questions. And I usually get someone that to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. I tried a few people, and I was told that inappropriate questions for you would be a tough one, and people wouldn't have any for you.
What?
Yeah. I mean, I must have asked the wrong people.
You should have called Kevin Jones. He probably would have had a couple of good ones.
I usually don't ask the guest who'd ask for inappropriate questions, but I did that with Chris Davenport recently, and that worked out. But either way, I'm coming up with 3 inappropriate questions for you, and I am guessing that you have seen other people act inappropriately on the road before. Maybe they're rude, maybe they're an ugly American, but you're traveling with someone and you just feel embarrassed that you're part of this group. And what is your most embarrassing situation like that?
So I've got a few, but one that comes to mind is Mickey Albin, and I think it was Jeff Anderson. They were in Canada, and we were coming back from Canada, and they got pulled into secondary. They had, weed or something in their bag. It was under their fingernails. They were in secondary forever. It was like 2.5 hours of waiting for them. The other side of the border is waiting for them. That was a pretty funny one. I've had a couple of Canadian ones like that. Oh, we were in Argentina, I think, or Chile. Terrier was just lit. I mean, we pretty much had to carry him onto the plane because it was in the morning, and he stayed up all night. Him and Johan or somebody. I remember he was just like pretty much blacked out, and we had to like carry him onto the plane, and the stewardess were like looking at us all weird and stuff. But there's been quite a few of those ones.
Have you ever been the guy getting carried to the plane, or have you always been kind of in control?
No, I've never done drugs. I've never smoked pot. I've never wanted to be like, I drink a little bit, but I'm not the guy that's trying to be out of control. I don't like being like that.
Okay. Question number 2 is, you were once asked about snowboarding keeping its identity, and you answered, yes, I think snowboarding will always have its separate identity. Snowboarding has style. It's hard to have style when you're holding poles in your hand.
About skiing.
Well, you don't seem like a hater by any means. You seem like the nicest dude ever, but was there a time when you were?
No, I wasn't like a hater on skiers. Skiers sometimes bug me, but people bug me too. Like, what bugs me is like when skiers come down, like you're down a cat track, and you're coming down a cat track at Whistler or whatever, and you're like going up to like hit a little side hit or something, and skiers trying to come past you, and they're like clicking their little poles or clanking their poles, like stuff like that bugs me. But I'm not bugged by skiers. I have some really good friends that are insane skiers at Squaw Valley and stuff, like insane.
Yeah.
So I've never had like oh, you're a skier, you're a kook or anything. I've never thought like that, but some skiers, like the way they vibe snowboarders, bugs me, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. Your final inappropriate question. On the road, pranks are part of life, and I would think if you're not the one who's being crazy, partying and doing stuff, you probably could have fun doing pranks on other people. What's the best prank you've either done or seen?
I've never really been the guy pranking people. Craig Kelly was. Craig was the prankster. He just did a lot of stuff. I don't think I've ever really, nothing comes to mind that I've like tried to prank somebody. I don't know. I've had some great times with Jeremy Jones and JP Walker, but it was just all in fun. It was just never a prank,
Yeah.
I'm not like that.
All right. Well, I think you can sum up your career by quoting the infamous thing that you said in TB3. Your part opens up with you saying that I like to ride everything, the whole mountain. And that's kind of what you've done like your whole career. It's like from your first video part introduction into snowboarding, it might even be your second, because I think you had like See No Evil or something like that before that. But from the first one that everybody really saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was coming down the mountain. Yeah, Mike McIntyre, Mack Dawg, kind of made me say that. He was interviewing me. I remember that. He was just like, you got to say something, blah, blah, blah. Because nobody knew like who I was. And I'm like, I like to ride everything, the whole mountain. And it was just turned into this funny thing. But Mack Dawg made me say that.
All right. Well, that quote lives on, and you've been able to ride everything on the mountain. You've also had urban, going up mountains, surfing, retail, rep life, travel. You've done a shit ton. You've got a family. You're married to Shannon Dunn Downing. And it's been a pretty charmed life for a surfer who just wanted to become a pro surfer. And that didn't happen. You became a pro snowboarder. And the rest is history, man, and I thank you for your time.
That's true, Mike. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm blessed.
So that was time with Dave Downing, and he really seems like a nice guy. I interviewed Dave before for something I did with Peter Glenn, and both times I had the opportunity to chat with Dave, I came away with how down-to-earth and nice Dave was. It's almost like I forget that he was a pro for 15 years, as most dudes who have the status that Dave does has at least a little bit of attitude or cockiness to them. There's none of that with Dave, and I'm sure that's why he's lasted for so long in the snowboard world. Because he not only gets it, but he's such a cool guy that people want to work with him. And after interviewing him once, I wanted to talk to him again. Next, I need to hit up Dave to get his wife Shannon Dunn Downing on, because she was way better than Dave at pipe riding, which is fitting because Dave seems like one of those dudes who could care less about contests. That's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening and ask you to email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com if you have any questions or concerns. I will get back to you. And the big favor I want to ask you is to get you to review me on your iPhone. It takes about a minute, and here's what everyone, even people who already subscribe to the podcast, need to do. First, hit the podcast button on your iPhone. Second, search for the Powell Movement. Third, click on my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where you see the stars. Fifth, hit the stars, and you're done. It's easy, and it makes me feel really good about myself, and I need that as much as ever these days. Finally, I want to thank my amazing sponsors who make this show happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Cole Headwear, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.